So we're in the courtyard between the four buildings of this complex. This is, I'm not sure what it really should be called, but everybody almost always refers to it as Woodward's because this was the location of the Woodward's department store. But what it is major piece of urban renewal in the downtown east side of Vancouver. Some of you, I'm sure, have never been here, and I don't know if you will get here in the immediate future, but it looks like four buildings, and two of those buildings have rental housing in them with some commercial on the bottom, and to some extent it's a heritage site. So there's a building on the far side that is all that's really left of the Woodward's department store, and in truth, mostly the facade. But it's a complicated facility, and the actual building that we use is really three facilities in one. So the same physical building has the London Drugs in it with the School for Contemporary Arts wrapped around it and above it. And then on top of that, it has a single resident occupancy apartment building really on the roof of the school managed by the Portland Hotel Society. So it's complicated from that point of view. We're always dealing with fire alarms and comings and goings of not just people who come to a theater.
Great.
What's also, if you think about it, quite unusual is we have 7 venues and exhibition spaces, including a cinema, and a set of teaching facilities, and they're stacked. They're in one physical building, which is quite unusual. So you have, just for starters, you have a cinema on the ceiling of a theater. And that's not something that is common, but on the other hand, it really reflects the School for Contemporary Arts. So let's go inside.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you about the history of the development of this building, the Goldcorp Center for the Arts. Originally, the School for Contemporary Arts, or its predecessor, was up on the campus, on the main campus in Burnaby. And the curious thing about that was we had essentially responsibility fully, once the credit program was started, for the SFU Theater. And it's still there on the campus. It's I forget what it's called now, but it's the lecture hall, maybe it's the Diamond Lecture Hall, but it's right across from the main library. And it's actually quite an interesting facility because it was built in the 1960s when the university was founded as the sort of classic multi-use facility. And on some level, the history of its evolution as a theater was to remove a lot of the multi-purpose stuff and make it more generally useful for what it was actually doing. Other than that facility, our facilities were a set of trailers that came across Canada to celebrate Confederation. That's 1967, and had been blended together to make a theater, a curious theater that had 8 or 10 columns right smack in the middle of it, where they'd taken out the walls of the trailers, and where you could literally jump up and touch the lighting equipment. Then the rest of the facility was essentially a collection of leftover buildings that had been put up for the education facility, et cetera, et cetera. And so everything was a kind of a compromise except the one big theater. If I had to answer what were the overriding principles that governed the thinking of the School for Contemporary Arts about this building, and it's worth pointing out that when the building was designed, we were the only people that had serious input into this. And it was subsequent to the construction beginning that other kinds of influences came into play, like a performance series and other parts of the university using the facility. So this building is an extremely interesting example of how something like this could work out from the point of view of not, say, taking an existing facility and then figuring out how to use it, but rather being able to actually have a major say in what kind of spaces and what kind of capabilities you would want. And in a very real sense, it reflects the history of the School for Contemporary Arts. Now, I said there were some priorities that ended up having major say in the design of the building, and I would say functionality and flexibility, the ability to change the structure of the building or the equipment of the building and what's used for what is really important, because we'd been in facilities that couldn't do that. We couldn't do that, or they couldn't do that. And also the priority of the teaching and the making of art, and shall we say, a lessening of things like style and public glitz and decoration. So,
but it was custom made for you guys.
Yeah, it was built for the school. On the other hand, it's built inside of a complex that had to satisfy all kinds of different needs. And so the best thing that ever happened was the developers prioritized the market housing and the stores that would get them some income happening right away. And they kind of left the School for Contemporary Arts to later on in the process, not the actual end, but later on. And we were lucky enough that the SFU administrators actually saw this opportunity and got the money up front to do the internal design of the building. We worked with largely proscenium architecture and interiors, who in various different contracts over many years were part of things like the renovation of the civic theaters, the complete rebuilding of the Vancouver East Cultural Centre, and it just goes on. And they were extremely, extremely knowledgeable about the ins and outs of these kind of facilities. So we were lucky. Also, though, anytime we had an opportunity to prioritize art-making spaces, art teaching spaces, we pushed for that. And we always kind of held back on sinking money into decor and things like that. There's been a bit of change since the building opened, but and some more money's been put into things like the lobby and into some of the facility capabilities like the seating. But the original priority was always the making of art and the exhibiting of art. Performing arts, visual art, film, you name it. The one thing that couldn't be fitted in here no matter how hard we tried, was all of the visual art program and some of the MFA program spaces, so that space I referred to way back, which is actually down on 611 Alexander, we still have that space as a leased space, and that's where some of these functions, for example, anything past first year visual art is actually, unfortunately, not in this building itself.
All right, take it inside.
Okay, so we're on the ground floor. This is a 6-story building, a 6-floor building, and in fact, 2 floors are below us and 3 floors are above us. But one of the things, we'll come back here, but one of the things I want to point out to you is you're seeing the lobby, and over in the far corner there, you're seeing the O'Dane Gallery. But there is much more to this level that you don't see, and that, you know, lots of times people don't even realize is here at this point. We're actually alongside the entrance to the O'Dane Gallery, and I don't think we're going to go in because, quite frankly, I don't know if it's alarmed or not. This lobby's been dramatically reworked in the last several years. It was not a high priority in the original construction of the building, so it was pretty plain, all things considered, and pretty functional. This is the O'Dane Gallery here. It's part of the SFU gallery system and has close connections to the visual art program and the MFA program. But we're just going to see what we can see through the windows here. And one of the interesting aspects of it is that it has a street presence, and that was really one of the key things about the whole complex development, in the sense that it was one of the high priorities that this complex, the stores, London Drugs, Nestor's, which is now called the Woodward's Food Floor, these were actually intended to work towards renovation in the downtown east side. So from the outside, we'll just take a look out here, and you can just see that in normal times, as opposed to COVID times, this front face here would actually be a gallery space. Maybe we'll just show the blank windows. Okay. All right.
Where are we now?
Well, we're here in the loading bay. And it seems like a funny place to come before we see any of the capabilities or the studios or the venues themselves. But it's quite interesting to think about because, for example, this is the entire loading facility for 4 buildings, including a major food floor and the London Drugs department store. What I'm interested in is the fact that this door for what is in fact a fine and performing arts complex is 10 feet by 10 feet. And so's that door to get out of here, and the one behind Vlad is even smaller. Why I think that's interesting is because it tells you what the complex is not. The complex is not a touring facility. It's not intended for bringing in large-scale shows, although, interestingly enough, the very first thing that came in, the feature event in the Winter Olympics Festival in 2010, was, in fact, an international touring production of the Blue Dragon, Dragon Bleu, of Robert Lepage. but it was a production that was designed to tour internationally. So it's not like you can't do it, but clearly the building was thought of as a smaller performance facility and not some place where you could bring in thousands of audience members to make profitable shows. So that tells you quite a bit about it. Where are we in the building? Well, in fact, we're in the bottom of the building, the B2 level, and this is actually the extent of the lobby for a 400 or so seat theater. It's not really large. In fact, it's as small as we could get away with, so that we had more actual performance space, more actual workspace. And sometimes it's an issue, but it does tell you a lot about where our priorities lay. The entrance level is actually not this level here above us, that's B1. The ground floor, where we were sitting in the orange-red colored lobby, is actually another level up. So you can see that this complex has actually got large parts that are multi-level. So we'll get to there eventually, but in a very real sense, the B2, B1, and ground levels, the bottom three levels of the facility, the Goldcorp Center, are actually integrated, and it's a triple height theater, which we'll eventually get to.
Great.
Now, wrapping around that are a series of workspaces, and I think we'll just go around them in the same way you would experience them if you were walking. So this is backstage, or at least part of backstage. It's also the only place in the building where there's dedicated space for the visual art program. And in fact, even that has got multiple uses. So this is where most of our first year visual art is taught. But because we could when we were constructing the building, we put in power for events. So these are what are known as company switches, very significant amounts of available power. And it's even got hidden behind the recycling here is actually a hole through the wall where you can run cables to and from this space. I think this is actually a reaction to the one time we, in the history of the school, requested that a hole be cut through the concrete wall between the SFU theater stage and the shop behind it, and we were quoted just shy of $10,000. So we never wanted to be in that position again. So who knows if we'll ever really use them, or at least they'll be used regularly, but we're never going to have to plead to have a hole cut through concrete walls because we built it in. Then, even though it's a visual arts studio, it has a grid, and that grid has been used and the space has been used for performances, but it's also conceived of as a way of hanging visual art pieces and sculptures, you name it. So this is first year visual art, and it's really the only part of the visual art program that actually was able to be put into the building, and then everything else is at 611 Alexander. This small space here looks more like a lounge. It is in fact a performer's lounge, and in the world of theater performance and production and design, that's known as the green room. So this is it. And what you're not aware of, if you haven't come back here much, is that it's also the space that has the dressing rooms. So here's one dressing room, which is followed by a shower and bathroom complex, and then another dressing room, another shower and bathroom complex, a third dressing room, and finally, we're back where we started. So we haven't really talked about the stuff we've been passing through, and won't really talk about that much till we get into some of the venues, but I did want to point out to you a lot of this curious looking equipment stored down the side. This is part of the modular seating system. So there's a lot of legs, railings, some portable seats, and then on this side here, a lot of platforms. When we go into some of the theater complex up above, this will make sense. And here as well is another useful thing to note. This is a genie lift, a personnel lift. And this is critical because in the venues, you need lifts to work lighting and sound equipment. Also, another crucial component of this facility is the freight elevator. Freight elevator was down for, I don't know, more than a year, and that caused very serious inconvenience because this is a 6-floor building and the freight elevator is crucial. It goes to every level in the building. And while I'm thinking about that, one of the important aspects of the design of this building is accessibility. The person, Casey Jones, who was the contract administrator, was so intent on having this be an accessible building compared to many parts of the original campus on Burnaby Mountain, that she commissions some students from the School for Contemporary Arts to follow people in wheelchairs, including a powered wheelchair, and watch them get blocked over and over and over again on the campus. So she was emphatically insistent that nothing was going to get by her that wouldn't be accessible. And I think in the whole building there are 4 or 5 small practice rooms that you can't get into with a wheelchair.